Hi guys, I'm just another guy named James, and today I'm going to be talking about X-Men 97. And you may be wondering, why did I pick, the middle of March 2025 to be talking about X-Men 97? It's because the show turned about 1 year old earlier, that it turned is about 1 year old right now. And I figured now would be a better time to go over the show and answer the question, was it really that good to begin with? Alright, so X-Men 97. And there will be spoilers for the show in this video, by the way. X-Men 97. If you haven't seen it, very fun show, actually. But definitely not perfect. So, there are a few things to know about the show going in. If you haven't seen it, the show takes place 1 year after X-Men the Animated Series. So it's a sequel series. It also incorporates a massive time jump. Well, I say a massive time jump. X-Men 97 takes place 1 year after the end of X-Men the Animated Series. Now, theoretically, there's nothing wrong with that, but it makes a few things that we'll talk about later kind of iffy, you know what I'm saying? Let's see. The show has a jarringly different animation style to its original series. So to X-Men the Animated Series, it has a very different animation. Different animation. So it has a different animation style. We'll say different art style. Different art style. It also, but because of that different, slightly, much more simplified art style, the animation's also a lot smoother. Smoother animation. But the animation's a lot smoother. One of the odd things about this show is a lot of the characters change pretty substantially between the original series and X-Men 97. And you could say, oh, it's because of that time jump you mentioned earlier. Well, none of the changes are ever explained in the show. So there are a bunch of characters in X-Men 97, just like in the original X-Men the Animated Series. So I want to talk about each character a little bit, but we'll limit it to every character that has their own basically their own title card in the show's intro. All right, so you have about, I think it's like 15 characters, so this is gonna be a bit of a marathon, but let's get it started with, let's see, right over here, characters. All right. It's definitely not proper spelling. Ignore the spelling in this video. All right, let's see. So, characters. There are a bunch of them, like I said. First one I want to talk about today is who do I want to talk about first? Let's talk Rogue first. Rogue went from being one of the best characters on the original version of this cartoon on X-Men the Animated Series to by far one of the worst characters in X-Men 97. This show assassinates her characters so diabolically, and the main way it does this is by having her enter into a romantic relationship with Magneto. And Magneto is like 50 to 60 years old in the universe of this show. Rogue's like 20, 30 tops, even though she kind of sounds, and even though she sounds older, and because of the different animation style, she actually looks a little older too. Like a lot of the characters on this show kind of look, like in stills, they look really bad, I think. Especially some of the characters that had more details added to their appearance in the animated series. Seeing them change that really did not work in X-Men '97. A lot of the stills don't look great from that show. Anyway, so Rogue. Rogue, if you know X-Men, you probably think of Rogue and Gambit together. And if you think that, then congratulations, you're right. Rogue and Gambit are a romantic item throughout the show, especially at the beginning of the show, until all of a sudden Magneto comes in, and Magneto and Rogue had a previous relationship in the show, which was never addressed in X-Men the animated series. So this came right out of nowhere. So I don't understand why they thought that would be a good idea, but they did. So here we are. And midway through the show, Gambit actually ends up dying, getting killed off. And Gambit getting killed off is one of the worst things for Rogue in the series. Because in the same episode that Gambit dies, they're at this big mutant gala on this island run that the mutants run. And Magneto and Rogue are dancing together through the night at this big gala, and they kiss each other. And all of this stuff happens right in front of Gambit. It's devious work from Rogue and Magneto against Gambit. Then when it hits the fan, when the Sentinels attack the island, Gambit dies defending the island, takes all the Sentinels out, and for the rest of the show, Rogue is playing this role of the grieving widow, but it just doesn't work in the context of the show because we spent most of the show watching her absolutely curve Gambit. So it just doesn't jive, and it makes Rogue intense. It makes her very unlikable, actually, I find, in the show. But she's still kind of cool. Unlike every other thing that we've seen with the X-Men, she has her superpower. She has super strength and the ability to fly, which are superpowers that she stole from Miss Marvel. But but she's just overall, I found her to be very annoying throughout the show. All right, let's see. Who do we talk about next? Let's do some quick ones. Let's talk Jubilee and Sunspot. All right, Jubilee and Sunspot are basically these kids that are on the X-Men. Well, Jubilee's on the X-Men, Sunspot's not. But Sunspot is the character that we see open up X-Men '97. Sunspot is for X-Men '97 what Jubilee was for X-Men the Animated Series. He is the character that gets saved by the X-Men so that we kind of introduce ourselves to him, to all the various characters, enter into the world of X-Men. That's basically the purpose that Sunspot serves. Jubilee's just there, I guess. That's about all I got on Jubilee. She's there. She has an episode dedicated to her. It's not one of the better ones. Overall, these two are just they're mostly just there. Sunspot has this thing where he's a rich kid, but his parents hate his dad hates mutants, but he is a mutant. It's just it's a interesting, I guess, plot point, but overall, not two of my favorite characters, not two of the characters that I think anybody was watching the show for. All right, let's see. Let's talk Morph. Morph was an original character that was made for X-Men the Animated Series. So Morph ended up being a character who was made for X-Men the Animated Series, died in that pilot, and then ended up coming back, being a bad guy, and eventually redeemed on the show. Morph in X-Men '97 is slightly different. He has a different look to him. He wears a helmet now instead of just having his face out all the time. Odd, but all right. One of the weird things is they completely change how Morph's mutant ability works. Because in the original show, Morph could make himself look like anybody, same as Mystique. But in this show, he can, when he morphs into somebody else, he basically takes on their superpowers. There are a bunch of times where he turns into like Omega Red or Juggernaut or the Hulk, and he just starts decimating people. And every time that happened, I was sitting there thinking, wait, but that's not how his powers work. That's not how. That's not what we saw of him out of the original show. So how is he doing this now? It was always my question. But overall, again, Morph's like a fairly inconsequential character. He's a background character. Like these three characters, they're all just in the background. Let's see. Let's see who else. Who else was on the show? That's not like a main character. Bishop. Bishop. All right, Bishop. Very much so side characters. In the first couple episodes, that's it. I can't even really tell you anything he did. Don't remember it. Very unmemorable character in this show. Let's see. Yeah, let's talk. Oh, here, we'll throw Beast up there. Beast. Alright, Beast in this show. He exists, I guess. That's about all I got on him. Beast doesn't do much in the show. He's kind of there. And that's about it. He's cool. He's cool. He's funny. He's a lot like how he is in X-Men the Animated Series. Beast is the one that feels the most like they just grabbed the character out of the original series and just moved him into the new show. And I really do like that. All right, let's talk Professor X. Professor X. All right. So, the events that lead into X-Men 97 are the assumed death of Professor X, and basically, I say assumed because everybody thinks Professor X is dead. He isn't. And the X-Men know that Professor X isn't dead. There's attempted murder on him by Henry Gyrick, who's this like anti-mutant officer in the government. And he attempted to kill Professor X. So Professor X had to go up into space with his alien girlfriend and work to like heal himself. Basically, it's an odd plot point, but that's how the original X-Men the Animated Series ends. And that was kind of setting up the idea that the X-Men would be on their own from that point forward. And so Professor X spends most of the series not as a character, but as a plot point. Professor X, everything that is done on the show by the mutants is done in memoriam of Professor X. Magneto joins the X-Men. He becomes their new leader in memoriam of Professor X. The death of Professor Xavier leads Magneto to want to try things Professor X's way. And throughout the show, the problem is throughout the show we see that Professor X's way doesn't work, and it's one of those hard, rock and hard place moments where you see that Professor X's way doesn't work, and you see that Magneto's way doesn't work either. And that's one of the things that was one of the ideas that I really liked at the near the end of the show, was that neither one of them was right. The problem is they didn't commit to that idea. Because let me hold off on that thought for a second. I want to talk about the finale at the end. All right, so let's move on to some more characters. Let's talk. Ooh, that's the wrong color. Let's talk. Who do we want to talk? Let's talk about Storm. Actually, Storm is the character that goes through the absolute most in this show. Storm has a rough run of things. Let's talk. It's going to be hard to talk about Storm without also talking about Magneto, actually. So let's get both of those up there. So Storm and Magneto. The reason I'm putting them up together is because Magneto is the reason that Storm goes through so much in this show. So in one of the episodes, Magneto is making this, talking to the UN, and he comes in, he busts down the chamber, he starts talking to them, and this dude called the Executioner comes running in, and he has this gun that's going to take the powers away from Magneto. He's going to shoot him with the gun. His powers are going to be blocked somehow. They explain it in the show. I just don't remember. And Magneto, and the guy gets a clean shot on Magneto. But what happens is Storm jumps in and takes the bullet for Magneto. And this kind of sends Magneto down like a big big angry moment. But Magneto still chooses peace in memoriam of Professor X. Storm ends up getting her powers taken away. She goes on this whole spiritual self-discovery journey through Africa with her kind of boyfriend in the show, Forge. And it's a couple of very interesting episodes. They're weird episodes too, but they're very interesting. And overall, it's just it's like Storm goes through a lot of stuff, and then she rejoins the X-Men just in time for the finale. And then you have Magneto. Magneto is like the main character of this freaking show. He is the mover and the shaker. He joins the X-Men in the show. He leads the X-Men, and he leads them. Yeah, it's all right when he leads them, but things aren't very good. But yeah, Magneto's this. He's like I said earlier. He's trying to be a better better mutant liaison in Professor X's memory, but at a certain point, he realizes Professor X's way didn't work, and that's what all the characters on the show have to realize. Professor X's way didn't work, and now all of a sudden everything goes wrong. The X Mansion is destroyed. Everything goes wrong for the heroes in this show. And eventually Professor X comes back on the show, which is an odd one. And I'll talk about that in a second. I just dropped my marker. But yeah, so Magneto's definitely the main character of the show. He changes philosophy. He's kind of this he becomes the leader of the mutant world, not just the X-Men. And it's this really interesting idea. And you see him trying to be a hero until the very end when he decides, actually, humanity sucks, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to just wipe them all out. He's I think he takes an asteroid M up into outer space. And I think he takes all the technology out on planet Earth with a giant EMP blast. And yeah, it's a really cool sequence, but he just straight up becomes the bad guy again at the end of the show, which is odd. It feels like backwards character progression. But anyway, that's enough about Magneto. Magneto's interesting, but he's not that interesting. I suppose the next ones that we'll talk about will be we'll talk about the Summers. So that's Jean Grey, Cyclops, Cable, and Madeline Pryor. Madeline Pryor. That's the wrong color. Cyclops and Cable. All right, so Cyclops. Cyclops is just he's the perfect version of his character on this show. He's actually really interesting as a character on this show. Because after Professor X leaves, he's the de facto leader of the X-Men. He's been the field leader for the entire show. It should be him leading the team now. But when Magneto comes back, it's not. And I would have liked to see more of Cyclops wanting to be the leader of the team, more of him trying to push in that direction. But Cyclops is also busy because of all the stuff that happens with Jean Grey and Madeline Pryor. Now, Madeline Pryor is a clone of Jean Grey, who has apparently been the Jean Grey that Cyclops was married to throughout most of the X-Men the animated series. And that means that Cable, Cyclops' son, is actually Madeline Pryor's son, not Jean Grey's. And they reveal all this in just like in a couple of episodes. It's really weird, and it's not good for it's not great for Cyclops for Madeline. It makes Madeline Pryor like go on this whole like arc of being evil. Then she dies. Then you get this interesting, Cyclops is just really cool in the show though. He's this like cool, confident leader that you always wanted to see him be. He uses his powers a lot smarter than he did in the original show, and this is an example of how, in a lot of ways, the show's different. Like almost all the characters are slightly different, but for Cyclops it works because they make him cooler. But they don't change him drastically. They just make him more of what he. They tone up the cool parts. They tone down the lame parts. It really does work super well. And then you have Cable. He's kind of just there, if I remember right. You for a little bit in the finale, these three, Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Madeline Pryor, just running around. It's just the three of them. They're just chilling. Summer's family vacation. And then you also have... So Jean Grey is by far the least interesting character on any X-Men show. Well, least interesting is almost always the wrong word. She has a lot of interesting things happen to her, but she's just a boring character. She's just bland as soap, as dishwater. She's just boring. And there's nothing wrong with having a boring character, but when she's the main character of a bunch of episodes and a bunch of storylines, it doesn't work. And you really see that. You see that even more so in the X-Men movies. Like, they always struggle when they try to do, like, the Phoenix Saga or the Dark Phoenix Saga. Because they try too hard to make it about Jean Grey when it's really about all the other characters acting around her. Again, Jean Grey is kind of like Professor X on the show. She's more of a plot point than she is a character. Yeah, I think that's all I got on the Summers. Let's talk our last three characters. And I saved these three for last for one simple reason. They are my favorites. Alright. We got Gambit, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler. Now, Gambit and Wolverine were obviously main characters of the original X-Men the Animated Series. But Nightcrawler was not. Nightcrawler was on the show, but he was basically a guest star. Because he was big in the X-Men comics of the 80s. Gambit, Wolverine, Nightcrawler. And Nightcrawler from show to show actually changes a lot. In Nightcrawler's appearances on X-Men the Animated Series, he was mostly just there to... It was this really cool thing where Nightcrawler was this devout Catholic, devout Christian, who was basically like both of his episodes were all about faith. His first episode, because he had faith in God, he was able to persevere through hard times. And then in his second episode, where he found out that Mystique was his mother, he had to find the strength. He had to ask God to provide him the strength to forgive her. And they're both really good episodes. They're actually, I think, the two best episodes of X-Men the Animated Series. So I can see why they brought him back. But they took away a lot of the stuff that made him interesting, and they exchanged him for more of the kind of like goofball, fun Nightcrawler. And I don't think that was even necessarily a bad call. Like, I really enjoyed like fun, exciting Nightcrawler that you got in like X-Men Evolution. Speaking of X-Men Evolution, by the way, going back to Cyclops for just 1 second. If you want to know what Cyclops in the X-Men 97 is like, he's like a grown-up version of the Cyclops from X-Men Evolution. And I think that's really cool, because I think X-Men Evolution is your best version of Cyclops. Alright, back down here. So yeah, Nightcrawler's pretty substantially different, but he's really cool, so I don't mind it too much. Wolverine's actually he's just not really important to the show. He's in the action scenes, he's in every episode. But he's just kind of there. He's not really there, you know. Like none of the episodes are really about him. Um, he kind of takes a step into the background for a lot of the show, which I actually think was a really good call because it made the show more about the X-Men and less about Wolverine. And I think that's a great call for the first X-Men cartoon in 10 years. And then last but certainly not least, because he's my favorite X-Men, we have Gambit. Now Gambit gets done so incredibly dirty on this show. Like I said, he spends most of his time in the first half of the season getting absolutely curved by Rogue, the love of his life. And then he gets one really cool episode. He fights, he's defending the mutants, he's being really cool. And I was watching the episode and I was thinking, man, Gambit's too cool in this episode. Something's gonna happen. And then Gambit freaking dies. And killing off Gambit was added so much stakes to the show that it really made me think they were gonna kill off. I thought since they killed Gambit, they could kill anyone. As we'll get to when I start talking about the finale in a second. Obviously, they wouldn't kill anyone, even if it would have been better for the story. All right, so yeah, so those are all your characters. There's a lot of them. There's 15 main characters, more or less. And I'm pretty sure this is just everybody that has a title card on the show. This isn't even all of the side characters and cameos that you saw on the show. Like I said, there are a bunch of Marvel Universe cameos in the show. Captain America's on the show, Iron Man's on the show, Black Panther, Spider-Man, Storm's a main character. What am I saying? A couple others. They're just a bunch of kind of cool, quick cameos, and that's obviously really cool. But one last thing I want to talk about. I want to talk about the finale of the show. The finale of the show was incredibly disappointing. The show had been building all this steam. All these tensions are rising between the characters. And yet, none of it ends up mattering in the finale. The finale basically is all we have these like human sentinel hybrids who like take over and they're busting heads. They attack the X-Mansion. They're taking everybody out. It's kind of interesting, I guess. I remember why Cyclops leaves for his like a second honeymoon, basically, with Jean Grey, so that they can like actually get to know each other better because he had spent so much time with the clone. Is why that they get separated, and for a while there in the finale, it's just all the various groups of X-Men who have sub-separated, like fighting off these their own group of like human sentinel hybrids. Wolverine and Nightcrawler have definitely one of the best fight scenes in the entire show. While they're doing this, it's really cool scene. You get Nightcrawler teleporting around. He's got his like freaking sword. He's got like pirate swords that he's fighting. It's really cool. It's just a really cool scene. Highly recommend you watch the entire show, honestly. But talking about the finale, it just really didn't. The finale could have worked perfectly if the show killed off two more characters. If the show killed off Professor X and Magneto. Because what you see in the finale is that neither one of them is right. And that the piece should have been in the middle ground of their two ideals. And I think that would have been a really, really cool thing to see in the show. But instead, what happens is Professor X comes back from his time in space just in time to go up into outer space and go right back up to outer space and fight Magneto as like the end of the show. And it is a cool moment that, Professor X comes back. All the X-Men get like their 80s costumes. Wolverine gets like the John Byrne yellow and brown. Cyclops has like the head sock. It's cool. It's a fan service moment. I'm a fan. I like fan service. But the show just would have been, it would have been a more impactful ending if Professor X and Magneto had died. If they both if they were both killed off, and that left Cyclops to be the leader, the true leader of the X-Men. And that would, I just think that would have been really cool, you know? Getting to see seeing them grieve Professor X's actual death, seeing, you know, and seeing them even grieve Magneto's death. That would have been cool. And that would have kind of ended the idea of, oh, these are the only two ideals about mutants that can really exist in the X-Men universe. It would have been cool to see kind of a middle ground come up emerge. I think that would have been a really cool idea. I wish they'd done that. Obviously, they didn't, and I think it would have been a much more impactful ending for the show if they killed Professor X and Magneto. And we are set to get a season 2 of the show, so obviously this show isn't complete. Probably should have put season 1, but honestly, a season of a TV show should be able to stand on its own and not suffer for it. And honestly, I think the show just would have been a lot better had they killed off those two characters at the end. It would have made a much more lasting impact, I think. But the finale, it's cool up to a point, but it was also just too long. It was 3 40-minute episodes, I think. And it's really long for the story that it tells, I would say. And X-Men 97 up to that point had done a really good job of keeping the stories concise. They also, one more thing on the finale, they also just let the villain of the show basically get away with it. Like, they don't really stop, they stop him, but not really. Like, that's not what it's about. It would have been a lot cooler had there's this moment, the bad guy's like getting crushed under all this stuff. It would have been a much cooler moment instead of having Cyclops be like, no, you can still join the X-Men, it's not too late. It would have been a cooler moment to just have Cyclops blast him and have him freaking die. Because remember, this bad guy, this is the one who killed Gambit, who killed one of their own, one of their friends, one of their family members, who almost killed all the mutants on the world. And yet they don't care. They don't stop. They barely stop him. And it's just a weak moment in the show. Like the last episode of the show is the weakest episode of the entire thing. And it really should be the opposite. The finale should almost always be one of the best episodes. But yeah, honestly, that's pretty much all I've got to say on the show itself. But I do want to take the time to actually rank the four real X-Men cartoons. All right, now, you had 4 X-Men cartoons released at various times. You had X-Men, the animated series, released in 1992, I believe. Don't quote me on that. I wasn't alive at the time. That was your first X-Men show. That was obviously the show that led to X-Men 97. Then you had X-Men Evolution. X-Men Evolution in 2000, I believe. Yeah, X-Men Evolution released in 2000. Featured a younger version of the characters, but it was still a pretty good show. Very good, I would say. Very interesting art style on that one. Much more simplified than X-Men the Animated Series, but again, it had much smoother animation, so it was accepted. Then you had Wolverine and the X-Men. Wolverine and the X-Men. That was released circa 2011, so we'll say approximately 2011. And then obviously you have X-Men 97. X-Men 97 released in 2024. Released in 2024. Alright, so these are your 4 X-Men shows. They're not a single one of them is a bad show. I want to get that out of the way before I rank them because I'm probably going to make a lot of people mad with this ranking. So let's hop into it. All right, so we'll go. So I'm just going to write the number that they get ranked. One, the position number. 4 is going to be the lowest. 1 will be the highest. All right, number 4, X-Men Animated Series. Look, not a bad show. Like I said, none of these are bad, but in a lot of ways, X-Men the Animated Series really shows its age. You can really tell that it was made in the '90s by the look, by the words that they say. It reeks '90s. The animation's by far the worst on that show. The art style is really good, but the animation itself actually sucks. And a lot of the stories that it tells, while I'm sure they were great comic stories, just a lot of them lack the stakes that they needed to be great. Like the Phoenix Saga is a great example of this. When the X-Men are able to bring Jean Grey back from the dead by all holding hands together around the Ruby of Encron, I'm like, what is happening? Am I watching an episode of Powerpuff Girls? What is this? Why are they all holding hands around the gem? And the power of friendship is bringing Jean Grey back to life. What is happening? Not a fan. Not a big fan of that show. Number 3, it's got to be X-Men '97. X-Men '97 just has, it's really cool, and there is part of recency bias makes me want to put it higher because I remember watching it for the first time, really enjoying it. But the finale was the ending was so weak, and overall, like thinking about it, a lot of the characters don't really make sense, and a lot of them don't really do anything. Like Wolverine, Beast, Bishop, Morph, Jubilee. None of them do anything. Like they're all there. They all have episodes. They all kind of appear in episodes. They all have like little things that they're doing throughout, but none of it matters. And that just made the show feel more two-dimensional to me than it was. Then let's see. For me, these two are the 2 and the 1. And these were the X-Men shows. All of these 3, I watched all of them during my childhood. X-Men the Animated Series, I watched all the time when I was a kid. But these 2 were the ones that came out. This one came out just before I was born. This one came out when I was a kid. And honestly, Wolverine and the X-Men, had it been given the opportunity to actually finish its story, I think it could have been the best. And I know, so Wolverine and the X-Men, one of the things about that show is it was meant to tie, there were plans to tie it in to Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, one of the best Marvel cartoons there's ever been. Those plans ended up falling through, and both of those shows ended up getting canceled before their stories could get finished, which is an unfortunate habit of Marvel cartoons. So that leaves X-Men Evolution for the number 1. Now, X-Men Evolution coming in at the number 1 might be a little odd for some people, but I think the show's really good. Episode by episode, you get to see the characters grow and change. It's nice. You get to see them actually acting like, they're characters. They're teenagers. They're running around with each other, having fun. And I really dig that about X-Men Evolution. You get to spend the most time getting to know them as characters. Wolverine and the X-Men is straight up just a story. Like it's Wolverine and the X-Men and X-Men '97 are both these like tight, compact stories. So they don't really have time. You don't spend a lot of time just getting to know the characters. And I think that's eventually the downfall of both of those shows. X-Men the Animated Series just didn't have, you got to know the characters. You, as an audience member, got to know the characters, but it never really felt like they were getting to know each other all that well. Like, they never quite felt real to me on that show. And obviously they don't feel real in any of these. But X-Men the Animated Series just didn't quite get it. And having the characters be younger really excused, in X-Men Evolution, really excused a lot of the stupid stuff that they would do. like I said earlier, talking about Cyclops' character, Cyclops it was much more excusable to have him be like kind of lovesick and jealous with Jean because he's a 16-year-old kid. They're like that. That's how 16-year-old dudes act with their girlfriends, and maybe that's and that just makes it much more excusable when it happens in that show. And it is cool to just get to see all the characters grow, like literally growing up throughout the show. And they knew to keep some of the characters as adults, like Wolverine and Storm. They weren't gonna make them teenagers. That would have been really weird. And Beast, even though Beast would have worked as a teenager if you saw him like how he is in the Avengers comics. He's pretty, like a bouncy, bubbly, fun character. But yeah. So yeah, that's really all I got to say on X-Men '97. Overall, it's a pretty good show, but it definitely has its flaws, and I think it's honestly a little bit overrated. But it's pretty darn good. Like the finale was incredibly weak. Definitely the worst part of the show. But honestly, it's still overall just pretty good. That's really all I got time for today. So I'm just another guy named James. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.